Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, it's great. Penn State coming to town for what I assume has to be a top 5 matchup. Big noon is here. Everyone's been told to wear the same clothes. So, it seems like this has got to be one of the biggest games on the entire college football calendar. Anything I've missed?
Well, you've set the stage perfectly because this is a matchup between the two top picks in the Big Ten preseason. The unanimous top pick, Penn State, by all people everywhere, far and wide. Penn State, the number one team in the Big Ten, picked to win the Big Ten this year, and Ohio State, not quite good enough to be picked to win the Big Ten. Of course, just a lesser program, a lesser team, lesser talent by all measurements from those who follow the sport on an annual basis. So, can Ohio State level up to be as prolific as Penn State? That's what we're going to find out. That's what we're here to talk about today, as the number one Ohio State Buckeyes take on the 3-4 Penn State Nittany Lions, as the Penn State Nittany Lions town looking for their first Big Ten win of the year.
Yes, it is not exactly the game we expected, in as much as Penn State's record ends in a 4. And Penn State does not have the head coach we were anticipating seeing. Penn State does not have the starting quarterback we were anticipating seeing. Penn State does not have the defense we were probably anticipating seeing overall in the first year of the Jim Knowles era in State College. The last year under Tom Allen, they were pretty solid. They were one of the better defenses in the country. They were not Jim Knowles at Ohio State 2024 good, but they were pretty solid. So I felt like it was reasonable to sort of expect this year's Penn State team to, take the kind of step that Ohio State took in the first year of Jim Knowles, which was they went from a real disaster in 2020 and 2021 to reasonable, top 30-ish in Jim Knowles' first year at Ohio State. And it was like, well, okay, that was a real step forward. And then it took another step forward in year 2, and it took another step forward in year 3. So it was like, all right, Penn State's already starting from a pretty good baseline here. They've got a lot of starters back from last year. If they can take a step, just even a little step forward from last year's defense, boy, that'll be really good. And instead, they took a step forward to, about where Ohio State was in Jim Knowles' first year, where it's like, boy, they're not, they're still sure giving up a lot of long plays in moments when you wouldn't expect them to give up long plays. And it just has not quite looked right. And injuries, especially at the linebacker position, have played into that, and we can probably get into that a little bit. But, it's just, this is a year where, other than offense and defense and special teams and coaching and, I don't know, maybe concessions, I'm not sure. Things have not, other than those things have gone great for Penn State this year.
We could probably do like a summer series of shows where we try to just let's like fan fiction type of thing of pick a program and try to predict a Penn State type of situation where everything goes to hell, and it would all sound so preposterous. And I'd be like, hey, what about Penn State? You see what happened there? But also, like, look at LSU. Look at this. So it's almost to the point where now, like, you try the bold predictions of coming up with an imploding college football program. I think maybe that would be a fun summertime program.
I love that. Yeah, you said that, and I thought about the old worst case scenario, like survival handbook books from like 25 years ago, where it was like, okay, you're trapped under the ice. How do you get out? And it's like Penn State has been trapped under the ice since about late September, and they have not managed to find a way out yet. And yeah, I like that a lot, because you go through and it's like you could paint this picture. It's like, well, the players who are coming back are their experience, but they're not quite at the level Penn State. There are people who pointed correctly to this, who said, look, Penn State doesn't actually recruit at a top 5 level like some of the other schools that have brought back, followed the bring everyone back for one last run kind of thing. And James Franklin's game management was certainly a concern. And could Drew Aller take the next step, or was Drew Aller kind of what Drew Aller was? And all of that came true. And, we had a guy on our board, and now I'm forgetting who it was, and I apologize, but who kind of said, like, yeah, all those things, and went like, I don't get it. But he was thinking, well, boy, they might be like 8-4. And it's like, no, they might be like 5-7. This is there's not a guarantee that Penn State wins another game this season. Like, it's not out of the realm of possibility that they finish 3-9. It's also not out of the realm of possibility that they beat Ohio State this weekend. Like, that's also within the realm of possible outcomes, because this is still a relatively talented team. This is still one of the more talented, just pure guy by guy. How is the starting running back? Well, he's probably one of the best ones they're going to face all season in Katron Allen. How is the quarterback? Well, he was reasonably highly touted, but he's really young. So how's that going to look? And you can go through the defense, and boy, there's some really talented players on the defense tonight. Dennis Sutton is on the edge, and Zane Durant and Zaki Wheatley. Like, there are AJ Harris. Like, there are really talented players. There are a lot of players on this team that Ohio State wanted in recruiting. So these are guys who could potentially play at Ohio State. So if they can put it together, this could be a really competitive game. If they don't put it together, oh boy, we might find out how high the scoreboard can go at Ohio Stadium.
Yeah, like, I always got annoyed this during the magazine season and the voting season, and before then, where everybody just talked about this is Penn State's team, and I've said Penn State's time. It was their turn, and I said it several times. There is no such thing as turns. You don't take turns in college football. You got to cut line. You got to make your own turns. And so I've just had this negative association with this Penn State football team from the outset. Now, I didn't call for any of this, but I didn't think they were going to win the Big Ten. And a large part of that is because of the offense and Drew Aller. And, you look at that Oregon game, he threw for 137 yards in that game and 2 overtimes. And that's my picture of Drew Aller. And that was, we see him mostly against Ohio State. And has he ever been, like, worried you or scared you? No. But now he's gone, and you've got Ethan Grunkemeyer, who is, we can only assume, a lesser version of that. So that's not good news for Penn State. And, you look at these 4 games, and their 4 losses in the Big Ten have all been close. I mentioned it earlier in the week. At the end of regulation of these 4 games, Penn State trailed by a total of 7 points. So to think that this can't be a close game, I would not tell you to do that. There's a number of reasons to think that it won't, but this series has been it's been close for a long time, and the blowouts are rare. Now, rarely has there been a set of ingredients like this one for something like this to happen, where you've got a program that, they've lost 4 in a row, Tom, so they've quit. And it's like, well, no, they haven't actually quit. They led 21-10 at Iowa. They led against Northwestern. They fought back, against UCLA. So they're losing. They're not quitting. At some point, do they quit? Maybe, but they haven't reached that point yet. And now what I will say is that the loss to Oregon, that devastated them. The worst thing that happened is that they had to play a game the next weekend, because we've talked about this before. The loss to Oregon last year devastated Ohio State, but they had a week off. With this 4 or 5 straight weeks of Penn State football, they finally had a week off now. They've lost those 4 games. Now they can finally breathe and take a look. And as Ryan Day says, they get their head above water and assess situations and just recalibrate and refocus. And now I would expect as good a version of Penn State as we can see. However, there are some things working against them, such as the passing game and Ohio State's defense. So when you're limited passing wise, that means you're probably going to be limited running the ball, because Ohio State's going to set out to stop the run, because that's the main thing that they need to worry about. And if you try to pass on them, they'll take what you can, they'll take their chances with that. So the Penn State offense against the Ohio State defense is the biggest mismatch in this game, and it's the biggest advantage in this game. And I'll need to see some successful surprises from Penn State to make me think that they can reach the 14, 17 point margin or mark through offensive means.
Yeah, and if you are going to have a scenario where stuff lines up for Penn State to cook up some successful surprises, this is it. This is the game where this is kind of their last best chance to make a real big statement, because realistically, if they lose to Ohio State, even if they lose to Ohio State close, they're going to get murdered by Indiana. Like this is not a don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes kind of situation. They are going to, as Terry Smith, their head coach, said, empty the clip. This is it. They're going to shoot what they got. And this is beating Ohio State is the hurdle that they have not been able to get over for years. Since 2016, they haven't been able to get over the Ohio State hurdle. And that failure has defined the program. So they are going to do whatever they can to get over that hurdle this week. And I don't, my expectation based on a lot of the stuff you just said is that they won't be able to, but you've got an offensive coordinator in Andy Kotelnicki, who is known for, what's the polite way to say gimmicky, creative offensive play calling. He's the guy who'll put offensive linemen in motion, and he's the guy who had Tyler Warren do 75 different things last year. He'll come up with creative things. He's had a week off, so he's had a couple weeks to put this together. Jim Knowles was going through, the Penn State folks have been talking about the fact that this was something that Jim Knowles talked to the Penn State offense all summer about, when you were at Ohio State, how did you defend us? Why did you do this way? And all that kind of stuff. And then sort of what the Ohio State offensive brain trust is, how they think. So this is something that Penn State has put a ton of time into way before the last 2 weeks. And then you've had the last 2 weeks. And Ethan Grunkemeyer is going to make his second career start. He also has now had 3 times as much practice time with the ones during the in-season portion as he had before his last start. So he's, it's not a lot of extra practice, but in terms of, boy, where are you on the learning curve? He's going to have a lot more reps of the ones than he did the last time he was out on the field. So all this kind of adds up to, this all adds up to a lot of uncertainty to me, where, we did our score predictions and I said this game could end up anywhere from 20-17 to 56-0. And it really just depends on, how does Penn State come out? How does Penn State do? They're going to take their shots. They're going to take their shots on offense. They're going to take their shots on defense. You're going to see a bunch of cover zero from Jim Knowles. You know how that can go brackets complimentary, and you know how that can go brackets derogatory. And so this is, if it goes well and they can force some turnovers, they can absolutely hang in there, make this a 4-quarter game and maybe steal one. If it doesn't go well, this could get out of hand real fast.
The idea of, you mentioned Indiana coming next week, so it had me thinking, so with Ohio State this week, Tom, I know you're a Star Wars fan, you're a huge fan. It reminds me of Rogue One, which was the ends up being the prequel basically to A New Hope. And so beating Ohio State for Penn State would be like basically the final scene of Rogue One, where they've stolen the plans for the Death Star. They've sent off the plans, and they know that they can now finally beat the Death Star, and they've done it. Except for the fact that as those plans are, in the hands now, the Death Star has shot down and is getting ready to destroy the planet that they're on, the moon that they're on. So, you've got Jyn Erso and you've got Cassian Andor just sitting on a beach watching the explosion coming their way. Beating the Death Star is beating Ohio State. The explosion coming their way is the week after against Indiana, where Kirk Cincinnati gives no F's about your feelings, and Indiana just rolls through Happy Valley nice win last week. That doesn't impact us. We're just going to roll through here and show you the power of this battle station, and then just keep going on. But I'm not saying that's going to happen. It's just what it reminded me of. Again, the Star Wars universe is fiction, despite the religions that have come from it. So anyway, the other side of the ball, I make a smooth transition. The Caleb Downs talked about it a little bit on Wednesday, where the whole Jim Knowles knows the Ohio State offense, but the Ohio State offense knows Jim Knowles. Where do you see the advantage? Or whatever. He's there's no advantage. Everybody knows everybody, and so you just have to go in understanding that. And when you think about it, though, it's well, you've kind of got to go back in time a little, because you're not preparing for the 2024 Ohio State defense necessarily. Where are you in this progression of year 1 to year 3? As Jim Knowles says, it takes you a few years. Where are you in this progression? Now, Right now, their average yards per play allowed is basically what it was last year. They've given up a few more yards per game over the course of the season, but it's not the fully functional battle station. Again, Tom, to use all of your Star Wars analogies. So it'll be interesting to see, like, if they're preparing for the biggest and the baddest, then maybe is that bad news for Penn State as well? Because if you're well beyond that, then that's not good news for Penn State, because you're preparing for something more, something better, but also, you have to prepare for what you've seen, which means there's probably something that Jim Knowles is going to show that they haven't seen.
Yeah, and I want to get to that in 1 minute, but first I need you to tell me, who is the Jar Jar Binks in this whole thing?
Oh, Brian Kelly. No. The Louisiana governor.
There may be more than one Jar Jar Binks in Louisiana. No, that's not a fair thing, because Jar Jar Binks talked really funny. That's not a fair comparison. Anyway, I think this is a Penn State defense where you don't really know what you're going to get from Jim Knowles. Jim Knowles, what Ohio State's doing is working on offense. And so, Ohio State doesn't have to get too crazy with things. What Jim Knowles is doing on defense is really kind of not working. And one of the reasons that it's not working is, part of it is sort of the confusion. And we've talked about that a bunch in recent weeks about the Penn State players like sitting in on coaches meetings to try and crack the code of what they're actually supposed to be doing on some of these plays. That's a big red warning sign. But the other factor that's really playing into this is they have linebacker U has a big linebacker problem this year. Tony Rojas, who is their best linebacker by a mile, he's out for the year. And they really did not have a backup that was a small step down. They have taken a big step back at linebacker. And over the years, we know, what is Jim Knowles' defense? It's a safety-driven defense. And they've got okay safeties, but if you don't have linebacker play that can hold up, then you can get run on. And if you get run on, and then you have to stop the run, then you're vulnerable in the passing game. And that's sort of where they've fallen into right now. I talked to Ross Fulton earlier the week on the morning show, and he talked about the fact that it was sort of recognizably the Jim Knowles Ohio State defense in a lot of ways. And then just in the last game against Iowa, when James Franklin wasn't there anymore, it was kind of basically throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. So at that point, you become unpredictable, which, that could be good from a Penn State perspective, where it's just, you're dealing with someone who's a total wild card, and you get into I'm not locked in here with you, you're locked in here with me sort of situation. But it can also be a defense is already confused at doing a bunch of different stuff, and how much of a consistent thread is there to all that? And the answer is, I don't know. The other piece is the broad expectation is that Jim Knowles is going to try to make stuff happen with the defense. And that means bringing more pressure and trying to get to Julian Sayin. The issue is, number one, Julian Sayin is one of the best quarterbacks in the nation under pressure. When he, with stats, when he's getting blitzed, his completion percentage does not materially drop off. He's not making a bunch of mistakes. So you can try that, but then that leaves you vulnerable potentially to some big plays in the passing game and even big plays in the run game, because we saw them play Iowa. We did a rewatch earlier in the week and saw them play Iowa, and Iowa is, let's respectfully say, not exactly an Ohio State caliber passing attack. And their quarterback ran for 14 yards a carry because he had 3 really long runs. And that feels like, we use the phrase pick your poison almost every week. And it's not us just being kind of hacky and cliched, because we hear the opposing coaching staffs during the postgame interviews use that exact same phrase virtually every week. Because you can't just say, well, against Penn State, what are you going to do? You're going to try to stop Katron Allen, because if you can stop Katron Allen and you can make the second time starting quarterback, who probably is not really probably ready, he's sort of been thrust into a starting role a year early. If you try, you stop Katron Allen, you make that guy try and beat you. With Ohio State, teams have been trying to stop the pass and trying to keep Ohio State from, bombing away on them, and that's fine. But Ohio State has recently been perfectly fine with, okay, We'll run a bunch of RPO, and if the run is there, great. And if not, we'll pull it and we'll throw to Jeremiah Smith, and he'll pick up 8 yards, and we'll do that 5 times, and boom, we're 40 yards down the field in 5 plays instead of in 1 play. And so, I think Jim Knowles is going to try to make something happen, because if Penn State just sort of sits back and just sort of plays the average, vanilla game plan, they're going to lose by exactly 3 touchdowns. So you have to kind of do stuff that's a little crazier to increase the variance. And that's where, maybe that increases the variance and turns a 3-score game into a 1-score game. Or maybe that increases the variance and turns a 3-score game into a 5-score
game. In trying to limit the Ohio State passing game, Ohio State right now has the number 6 yards per attempt team in the nation, 9.6. You've got Air Force and Navy 1 and 2, which tends to happen because when they throw it, it tends to go deep. USC at 10 is like the first legitimate offense, first balanced offense, 10 yards per attempt. Notre Dame, Florida State, Ohio State. So even in limiting things, Ohio State is still taking those 8-yard hitches on the RPOs and picking up the first downs and leading to like a 2nd and 2, and now the entire offense is wide open. So it's going to be interesting to see what Jim Knowles does. In Big Ten play, it's a very average Big Ten defense in terms of like they're towards the middle of the pack. Penn State is. They've got 5 sacks in 4 Big Ten games, and those came against UCLA and Northwestern, and they didn't have a sack in either of the Oregon or the Iowa game. Outside of the UCLA game where they had like 9 tackles for loss, they had 2 tackles for loss in their other 3 Big Ten games. So you're talking about trying to make plays. They've not really made a lot of plays. Maybe they've done a better job of limiting the big plays than Jim Knowles did in his first year. But good luck trying to do worse or not limit. Not improve on that, especially as he learned his lesson from Ohio State. So I think a lot of the lessons that he learned at Ohio State, he's applied to Penn State and doesn't, we're okay giving up 5 big plays. He's not. Now, it doesn't mean they won't give up 5 big plays. If they do, he's going to be mad about it, just like he was against Michigan in 2022 when, see, this is what happens when you give up 5 big plays. It's like, yeah, you can think it's good, and sometimes it is, and it's fine. You'll make up for it. But what if you don't? And this could be one of those games where it's, what if you don't? I'm not expecting a bunch of big plays. I'm just expecting consistent Ohio State offense with some occasional Big Ten big plays, and this to be very similar to some other games that we've seen from Ohio State this year, where they just assert their dominance on both sides of the ball, and I'm not expecting a 49 points or anything like that, but I don't expect this to be something where people are like, boy. Even if it's a 7-point game at halftime, I don't expect it to feel like a 7-point game at halftime.
Yeah, this is one where I think there's a real possibility that this is the good old compromise that leaves everyone mad, where Ohio State, I picked Ohio State to win. I don't know. I have to go look up my score prediction, but it was, but probably covering the spread by a little bit. But there's, this Penn State team, I think everyone has sort of looked at them and gone, well, they're going to be, they're terrible, totally irredeemable. They just went on the road to Iowa and played a real, true 60-minute game where they were winning in the 4th quarter and had the ball 20 yards from, potentially kicking a game-winning field goal in the final minute. And Iowa is not an easy place to win. And Iowa's actually a pretty decent team this year. Iowa's 17th in SP Plus this year. This is not a terrible Iowa team by any means. So this is certainly not a terrible Penn State team by any means. I just pulled up the SP Plus rankings while you were talking. Penn State on offense, 24th, on defense, 18th, on special teams, 18th. Like, they're like perfectly fine in every area. Now, SP Plus doesn't know that Drew Aller's hurt. So you can probably knock the offense down a little bit for that. But they're the 20th ranked team in SP Plus right now. They're not, and that's opponent adjusted. So, the fact that they didn't play anyone in non-conference, the algorithm knows that. So that's baked in there. This is a Penn State team that is still perfectly fine, perfectly capable of dragging Ohio State into a very typical Ohio State-Penn State game. I pulled up the series history for Ohio State-Penn State. Here's the winning margins. Ohio State has won every year since 2016. Here are the winning margins going back, starting last year, 7, 8, 13, 9, 13, 11, won, and then they lost by 3. And then you have to go back further than that to 2015 for them to, they won by 28 that year. But that's the only, you have to go back that far to find a year when Ohio State won by more than 2 touchdowns. So this is a series that does tend to, and I would almost guarantee you there have been years in there where people have said, well, certainly this year, Ohio State will absolutely thump Penn State. And they have, for good or for ill, done basically the exact same thing against Ohio State almost every year. Sometimes they lose by 2 touchdowns, 2 scores. A lot of times they lose by 1 score. This is a year where, hey, it's a Penn State team with an interim head coach. Certainly all is lost. Penn State did come in here in 2011 with an interim coach and win 20-14. I will say, Tony, I try not to get too hot takey. Arguably the 2025 Ohio State team better than the 2011 Ohio State team. But, if you'd like to disagree, by all means, I will respect your opinion.
If I disagreed, you would respect that opinion?
As much as I ever do, yes.
There are some rough watches in the 2011 season, that Penn State game being one of them. My score, I went 31-7, and this is probably 14 points difference because of the quarterback situation. Even with Drew Aller, I'm still picking Ohio State, but I'm probably thinking there's going to be a more capable Penn State offense. So you factor that in. Based on what we saw against Iowa, and I understand he's more experienced now, boy, the offense, it's a very, very good thing they had a bye week, because if they just had to play right away again after the Iowa game, I'm thinking -3 points for the offense, and like the kind of game where they get outscored by the defense type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
As it is, they still have players. I went 31-7, like I said. I was trying to remember what I went. I was thinking, did I go 38-7? Because that feels like a lot. Hopefully I only went 31-7, which means it's probably more of a 24-7 type of game, where it's just like you said, it's like, well, on to the next one. Boy, can't wait to get to West Lafayette.
No one's ever said that. Not even once. Yeah, I just went back and looked at our staff picks. I also picked exactly 31-7, which I hate when you and I talk all week about a game and come away with exactly the same conclusions. And we're always somehow like 3 points off at most with our score prediction. So yes, we have exactly the same score prediction this week for exactly the same reasons. Yeah, I mean, they could easily, you take, Penn State's defense plays slightly better. Ohio State takes their foot off the gas slightly earlier, whatever it is. I think my inclination would have been about 24-7, but I don't, with Purdue and then UCLA and then Rutgers on deck, I don't know that you need to be, really managing to the next week's game right now. So you're probably going to make sure you sort of finish the drill to a certain degree. So yeah, 31-7 is what I had. I also noticed that Chip Minnick and I, on 2 articles posted sequentially, picked exactly the same one random post, picked a photo of Penn State of an offensive lineman looking absolutely gobsmacked that he was getting called for holding, which is one of my favorite photos of all time. And I'm like, no one else will remember this. I can definitely use this on staff picks. And then he picked the exact same one. So shout out to Chip for extraordinary taste in photos. I guess I'll have to change mine.
So yeah, there you go. Go ahead and throw your own score predictions in the comments, and I will either thumb them up or thumb them down based on how close they are to mine. If they're outrageous, again, whatever you feel like it's going to be, go ahead and throw that in there. It's always interesting to get the feedback from the people. Tom, there was feedback on the bold prediction that said the show has grown like dry and boring.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Tom was like, you have a problem with what I'm posting? Well, do you have a problem with my comments? Like, but most of the feedback, the vast majority of the feedback on the bold prediction show continues to be good.
Inexplicably good, I would say.
Through no fault of our own. But there you go. If you're watching on YouTube, again, go ahead and throw up the thumbs up. We would appreciate that. And subscribe to the channel if you've not yet done so. Like, we're going to, as you know, it's football season. Shows are getting dropped all the time. Live shows happen as well. And of course, you can continue to find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Sign up now. Say hello to us there at the Buckeye Huddle message board presented by Jeff Ruby's Columbus. Would love to talk to you there. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you all later.